Alright, so I've been waiting to do something like this since I was about 12 years old. This is a Atari 2600 that my friend just gave me, and he doesn't know if it works or not, but all I can tell you right off the bat is it's very dirty. The outside's, well, you can see it's all grimy. The left controller port looks fine. The right one has seen better days. There's quite a bit of corrosion in here. A lot of green copper, and I mean it's got chunks missing, but what I care about is the guts. I don't really care what the outside of this case looks like. So before I turn it on, I want to make sure there's no crud in any critical areas, because I can tell this hasn't been taken care of. So anyway, we're just going to crack this thing open. I'm not going to put anything down because you can already see the condition. Let's get started. Now, when I was about 12 years old, my grandpa almost gave me one of these, and we were both pretty upset when he opened up the box and found out that somebody actually went into his garage, stole the console out of the box, and just left the empty box. So ever since then, I've kind of wanted one, but it's one of those things where do I want to spend the money on a perfect condition one, or just wait and see what happens? And I was lucky enough to just come across one of these. So, well, not come across. My friend asked if I knew anyone who was interested, and of course I said, yeah, I'm interested. I've never taken one of these apart before. That's interesting. There's a hole here, and you can see a potentiometer looking through the case, which you can only assume there's some sort of tuning that is needed for this console. Don't know what that is, but I'll probably find out. Oh man, that is dirty. Let's see, come on. Come on. Okay. So I can tell somebody has been in here before. Actually, that could have been me. This is extremely thin aluminum foil tape. I'm gonna wash this stuff thoroughly before I put it back together. Let me just put this aside. And then there we go. No idea what that is. Alright. So I'm just going to hose that off later. Let's look at some of these components. So this is the potentiometer that I saw from the outside, and you know, it's pretty clever. Well, not really. They didn't put a strain relief on this piece of coax, but it is pretty clever that they just have a port in here. So this cable is really easy to change out, which I might do. I've heard there's some modifications you can actually make on this console And you know, there's really not much going on in here. The only, I mean, everything looks in great condition. It's dirty, but I don't see anything visibly wrong. This smoothing cap might need to be replaced. There's quite a bit of flux on the back here, and these traces are bubbling. That happens sometimes with older consoles, but you know, I don't see anything broken. So unless this thing was thoroughly abused, it should actually work. I think what I'm... Oh. I oughta put these aside. So I think all I'm really going to do here is I'm going to focus my attention on cleaning these connectors up in here. And you know, I don't see a need to take this RF shield off. It looks pretty sealed. I can't see much dirt getting in there. I might stick a screwdriver in here and see how dirty that looks. But I think the only thing I need to do is check this capacitor. Now, I mean, this is clearly a voltage regulator. I don't memorize too many of these numbers, but I'd imagine it'd probably drop it down from 9 volts to about 5 volts, because most chips run very safely on 5 volts. And this, it looks like the brains of the operation is just going to be right in here, and this is the video control. But yeah, and I mean, there's not much to this, so I think I'm just gonna clean out some of this crud and do a quick cap check. And the capacitor doesn't look like it's leaking, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. And the fact that this is going to be a smoothing cap, if your voltage regulator on the power supply you're using is, you know, reasonably smooth, you really don't really need that. So let's see what this is testing as. And you know, they labeled everything in here, which is fantastic. And you know, this is testing perfectly fine. So I have a feeling if I didn't even open this, it would probably work straight out the box. Which is pretty remarkable, and everything is so simple. I was expecting to see a lot more in here than this. Anywho, let's clean it and and see if it works. Now, my friend only gave me the console itself. He didn't have anything to go with it. But my other friend was nice enough to loan me his original power supply for his, and a couple of his games, so I can verify that this works before I invest any money. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up, and then I'm going to plug in his power supply and maybe a game and see if it works. If it in fact works, then I'm just going to make one of these power supplies. I'm sure I have all the parts here. And yeah, let's go from there. I just can't get over how clean this is on the inside, considering how rough it was on the outside. It doesn't appear to have anything wrong with it at first glance. Let's use a little screwdriver. Looks like a mouse turd in there. Let that just fall on the floor. You know, when I told my friend that I wanted to test a console, and all I needed from him was to verify that the games he was going to loan me work, and that they're games that he doesn't care if something happens to them. He gave me Indiana Jones, which apparently is a very bad game, and a Space Invader clone, which Space Invaders is a very fun game, but he was telling me about how Indiana Jones, you need 2 controllers to play a 1-player game, and that's just, we both kind of agree that's ridiculous. Man, these pins are very corroded. I think what I'm actually going to do is get a serial port if I have one handy. Okay, well, no, let's just try inserting this and see. You know, it was crunchy to begin with, but it's fairly smooth now. You know, you probably can't see this, but it's kind of nice. They actually even number what the pinouts are on these ports, and that anyway, I find that pretty interesting, that a lot of times for production pieces like this, they'll just ignore little bits like that because, you know, who cares? You're mass producing it, you're not expecting anyone to modify it in any way. Let's just try to free up any crud that might be in there. It's got a little grime in it. Sounds pretty good now. That's very smooth, but I'm already here. Now, the only other thing is I don't have an adapter to plug that into my TV, and this is a, let's see, it's a, I forget what it's called. It runs on either channel 2 or channel 3 of your television, and I don't have the adapter to plug that into the back of my TV and see if it works. But what I do have is I have one of these cheap coax cables that nobody uses anymore. Well, actually, some people probably use it. And I have a bunch of these. What I think I'm going to end up doing is just lopping off the end of one of these and making an adapter just to see if this thing works. So all I'll do is hook the signal into the center here and ground to the side here, and that should be all that's needed. Actually, I'm going to put this over here for now. You know, if this actually does work, I want to do a video mod, because I think there's a way of modifying the Atari 2600 to have a component signal instead of a regular radio signal, which on modern TVs it's easier to plug one of those in than trying to find an analog TV that can support this. A digital TV might be backwards compatible, but I kind of have my doubts because manufacturers are pretty cheap. All right. This is a very cheap piece of coax. So if I get any fuzz on the screen, I'm sure it's due to this. Wow, I wasn't expecting that to be a single solid core that thin. But that's what I get for not wanting to spend $1 on a proper adapter. One nice thing if I end up doing that modification is the console has a little hole on the bottom where that RF cable just slides through, and the fact that it just slides through, you can put any cable in there without notching the case, which is a pretty nice little feature. Alright, so that's my simple adapter. It's not pretty, but it'll work on the sake of not spending money to get it to work. So I'm going to plug this into my TV, and I think I'm actually going to make my own power supply, just copy this one before, because the fact that this is original hardware, if I do end up breaking it, I'd feel really bad. Because my friend collects video games and don't want to kill that on him. Alright, so I'm going to go look for some parts to mimic this. So, real quick, 9 volts DC, and you know, I'm gonna zoom in on this. Okay, so output is 9 volts DC. It's a half an amp, 500 milliamps. Now, if you look at this, I'm fairly certain, I haven't done this in a while, but I'm fairly certain this little C with a dot in the middle represents the C on the outside, represents this part right here. Because if you're looking down like this, the outer part is this part right here, which is what I think should be ground, and it shows here that's ground, and then the inside is positive, which is that right there, the middle part. And his wasn't the exact same model as mine, but if I want to do some probing, I can actually find out, because any reasonable manufacturer will make this shielding ground, which reference to ground negative. So this should be negative, and if you just probe these connectors on here, this should be negative, and these pins right here will be positive. So before I do any of that, I'll probe this, make sure it is what I think it is, make a new one, and then I'm going to probe the board before I plug it in to make sure that there's not a model issue. So I'll get back when I find the parts. Alright, so here's what I came up with. I found this 9-volt DC 1 amp power supply, which is instead of half an amp, it's 1 amp, same voltage. So in theory, even though you can tell this one actually has a transformer and this one has some sort of small bucking regulator in it, in theory this one should be twice as good as this one as far as current supply. So that's okay. Now the ports are different, but I had this lying around. It's some sort of piezo receiver type thing. I think it's from a blood pressure wrist cuff or whatever they want to call those, but I'm probably never going to use this. So what I'm going to do is just cannibalize the port, and I mean that's about it. Probably get some shrink tubing to make it nice and neat. Now let's see. First, let's find out what this really... No, I've never seen a power supply, well, wall wart, where the prongs are right next to the cord coming out. I've never seen it. Okay, so see, now that doesn't match what it says at all. 13.66 volts. I'm going to assume that as soon as you plug it in, it's going to have, since it's a very low current rating, I assume as soon as you plug it in to the Atari, it's just going to drop down to the appropriate running voltage. The fact that I guarantee all that's in there is a transformer and a rectifier and maybe a smoothing cap, which would explain why there's such a large smoothing cap in the Atari. Anywho, let's see what this reads. Hopefully it's close to 9 volts. And that's pretty close to 9 volts, 9.51 volts. Now just one more time, the ground is in fact on this large part right here, which makes sense. This is actually a really nice cable. It's silicone, which very flexible, doesn't tear very easily. which would make sense if it was coming off of that blood pressure regulator, I forget what those things are really called. But man, when you're trying to cheat with these wire strippers, silicone's not very good at that because it doesn't tear very easily. So I'm gonna real quick so in theory this ground shielding here should be connected here, which it is. Good, no surprises. When I was looking up these power supplies online, for some reason they were telling me that the polarity was flipped, and I just couldn't wrap my hand around why Atari would do that. And it turns out they didn't. It was just some cheap power supply that was improperly labeled, I'm sure. Alright, so I got a little bit of shrink tubing. That's all I need. Okay, and let's just start putting this together. This one's a little bit fatter diameter, but this one I think will be okay. I'm not sure if it's long, it's like very long enough. That's right. Okay. Now your connections on this, they don't matter too much as far as how much current they'll allow pass, because there's barely any current going through this joint. But you do want to do it decently strong in case someone's going to yank on it, even though something like this, I'm sure I'm not going to be pulling on it. Anywho, I'm sure you guys just saw what I did, but that's okay. I will just shrink it like that, and let's see. It'll still work just fine. Okay. It's going to be a tight fit, but we'll see what happens. Alright, let's see if I can get all this insulation in there. What I might end up doing, because everything's so short, is do this to make it a little thinner and see what I can do. I don't think it's gonna fit. Let's wow. Let's trim that, make it a little smaller. Maybe put that in there. All right. Now, if I was smart, I would have tested this before I put the shrink tube on, but let's just see what happens. All right, so that's correct. That's correct. Okay, let's see what happens. Now, let's make sure the settings are correct. Power, let's set that off right now. Put it on color TV. Okay. Let's say channel 2. Difficulty setting, that's pretty cool. Let's see. I'm not an expert. Let's set it to novice. Oh, you can do, well, that's pretty neat. So for instance, you can set the first player and second player different difficulties, which for me is great. So if I'm playing against my friend Connor, I just flip him to expert and make me a novice, and hopefully I can maybe win, which I kind of doubt it, but anything can happen, right? Yeah, so power's off. Let's get Raiders of the Lost Ark. That is a very bizarre method of cartridge insertion. It looks like there's a little plastic sleeve in here that actually guides the cartridge in to make sure it's pointed in the right direction. That's pretty cool. But it really looks like it's going backwards. I mean, this one too, it looks like it's going backwards. Then again, I've never played with one of these before. This thing was in Goodwill. I'm glad Connor was able to find that. I'm just gonna check real quick. I know this should be self-explanatory, but apparently not. You know, it looks like it does go in backwards, where the cartridge can be, the label can be read from the back. I don't want to break the thing trying to get it in there. You know, there's also a piece of something in here. You know, it looks like it's a piece of incense. Well, that shouldn't matter. Let's try this. Okay, it went in. Weird. Okay, so nothing's there. I believe I have it set to channel 2. Let me turn on my TV for a second. Okay, so I have it set to channel 2. There's static on the screen. Let's plug it in. Okay, in theory that is probably good to go. I kind of want to test this real quick and see if everything's correct. Yeah, everything's good. Alright, let me do this for a second. Now, isn't that great? It's kind of annoying. Let's see. Alright, well. Sorry I'm not a better cameraman. I'm playing with the console while I'm doing that, but wow. It picture looks great after anyway, I'm glad it works. Alright, so now that I know this thing works, I'm going to put it back together. And what I did last night was I washed it. It might still look a little dirty, but trust me, it's a lot cleaner than it used to be. Let's see, what's the best way to put this thing back together? I would say it probably would be man, how would that go together nicely? Well, that looks, well, no. I need to put it together right. Let's see. We got these little foam pads. Go right in here like so. And all right, so that goes just like that. And it would probably help if I plugged in the video cable. You really can tell I never took one of these things apart before. My hands are just a little too fat. I'm going to have to take it completely apart. Alright. Alright, so this is about it. Should just pop right together. Looks pretty good. There we go. That feels pretty good. Okay. Now when I get a little bored and I start playing this, I might end up doing that video mod. I dug through my Hack Shack and I found the correct transistor that is supposed to allow you to get rid of the RF box in here and just hook it directly to your TV, which some TVs don't even have the RF jack in the back of them. But if my current TV has that jack, I'm probably gonna drag my feet on converting this. Okay, that should be good. Turn that off. Plug some power in. Plug this back into the TV. There you go. And I don't have a real controller, but this will do for now. So it does in fact work.